All right. Hello, everybody. Mr. Barden here. I'm just going to jump right into it. This video, I actually don't have my lights on. Let's, boom, now you can see me a little bit better. So anyways, sorry, I got distracted. This video is going to just be a general overview of working with MIDI in Studio One. Now, it's not going to be a super in-depth presentation. It's not going to be, every possible thing, just a general, working with it, how you should go about using it, small things like that. If you need more specific stuff, definitely look further. This is just going to serve as a general overview for the people in my class. So I've got Studio One open right here. This is my personal installation on my computer. I will say that in order to utilize MIDI devices here, you do need to actually have your MIDI devices, in Studio One and have it looking for them. I have another video about that, so you can check that out on the channel, or you can look. It's really simple. You just have to plug in your MIDI device, make sure it's on, and say add, and then just enter in all the information, make sure it's all good for your device, and say okay, and now your device will, work with Studio One. It's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to just make a new song real quick. I'm just going to make it an empty song, MIDI video demo. There we go. I'll leave that all the same. And there we are, create an empty song. The first thing I'm going to do is just make a new instrument track. So if you hit the T button on your keyboard, that pulls up in the add track. I'll call this, just synth one, but under type right here, it defaults to whatever you picked last. So if it's an audio, that means it's going to be recording something here. You're going to make sound into a microphone, and then it, that will be what gets recorded to the track. It's not going to be MIDI. To do that, we want an instrument folder. When you click on that, you'll see that, this icon changes from a little waveform to a little keyboard. You can pick certain stuff. You can decide what MIDI device you want to have the data come in from. If that's something you need to do. So maybe you have multiple MIDI devices. You can have one control one track and another control the other. It can be very useful, but you still have to have everything plugged into your computer. Most people, in my experience, will have one or two set up unless they're, trying to record a performance with multiple people. So more than that's kind of weird, but you can very easily control multiple stuff with one MIDI device just by having input set to default. So I'm going to do that right there. So this is our track. We can record MIDI data on it. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. I don't have a synthesizer hooked up just yet. It's just going to be blank MIDI data. So I have my MIDI keyboard on my desk. You can't quite see it from the camera angle, but it's there. Trust me. You'll notice this orange bar right here. Whenever MIDI data is sent in, you'll see that orange bar flashes up. So in order to record the MIDI data, you have to make sure your track is armed, because otherwise nothing will happen. And now we can start recording. And I'm just going to play some notes. 2, 3. All right, so there's my MIDI data. I'm just going to trim this up a bit so that way it's, we can fairly easily see everything on the screen. So there's my stuff, nothing too fancy. If you want to edit any of this, you can double click on the little recorded bit and you'll see this piano roll here. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger just so it's easier to see on the screen. But you'll notice that over here, you see the notes of the keyboard, and every C is labeled so you know what octave you're in. But each of these blue bars is the MIDI note, and it goes for the duration of the bar. So you can see the timeline up here is also down here. So do 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 do, and so on. A few things you can adjust. You can change a lot of the MIDI. You can click and drag it if you wanted to, move them up or down or, left or right in time. I'll put them back at the same spot. You can adjust that. You can have things set up to do chords or change the scales, transpose them all. It can be very useful. If you want to manually add extra notes, you can just double click and it will add a note right there. You can make them longer or shorter. You can actually see above me on the screen right here, that note is changing in real time. So you can kind of see that, see your representation. I'm going to delete that extra note just because we don't need it right now. There are a few things down here. I'm not going to go into all of them, but the important one here is the velocity. So every note we see in time, you'll notice it'll line up this note to this velocity, and it's just 0 to 100. We can make it a little bit bigger just so it's easier to see as well. The velocity in MIDI world is equal to the volume of the note, essentially. The reason it's called velocity is because on the MIDI devices there's a little sensor that tells when you press the key and when it reaches the end of its travel point. So oop, we started, oop, we stopped. How long did that take? What was the speed of the key? So when you press the notes harder, the velocity will be faster, so it'll be more, and that equates to louder. If you've ever played a piano, you know that when you hit the key very softly and slowly, it's very quiet. But if you hit it very hard and fast, it's very loud because it's mimicking, hitting the strings of the piano harder. So that's what we're going for right here. So I'm gonna just make it so that we can actually hear this now. So I'm going to go into my instruments and I'm going to go under PreSonus, and these are some of the default ones. I'm going to just load in the Mojito, make it nice and easy, drop it right there, and now we can start hearing some things. There's the default sound. Again, there's all these presets. I'm just going to leave it on the default for this video, but we can now play back our sounds. There's that again. It's the most beautiful thing ever, if you feel like that, advertising it that way. But those are the MIDI notes that we recorded earlier. All these notes are just instructions for the synthesizer. I can send that, if you want to copy this, make a new instrument track, paste it there, but instead of doing the Mojito, I'll do presence on this track, and I'll mute the other one, and I'll play this the exact same notes. I just copied and pasted. Oop. Doesn't like me. I just kind of. All right, let's do brass French horn ensemble. It should. There we go. Excuse me, I'm recording this live, so that's going to stay in the video. All right, but again, these are just instructions for the synthesizer to follow. These don't actually make the notes at all. That's why before I added the synthesizer in, we couldn't hear anything. These instructions, we can send them to, put them for different synthesizers. That's why these, had the different synthesizers making the notes. We could play them both at the same time. Again, they just make the different sounds. That's the core of what MIDI is. It's just numbers that serve as instructions for the instruments to read. This started back in the 80s, before computers were really used for performing and recording music, just because they weren't powerful or fast enough at that point. And this started off with all the hardware instruments, but now it's used a lot in computers because they're much more powerful. They can just send the numbers over USB. So we have all of that right there. We have our synthesizers. There we go. One thing I'm going to add now, just to kind of show some stuff, is a drum loop. Let's pick this one. Okay, I guess we're going jazz. Let's not go jazz because that's just a major scale. Electro pop instead. Drum loop. Let's go this one. I have no idea what it'll sound like, but here's our drum loop. I'm gonna make sure this tempo down here is set to 115, just to make sure that all lines up. And then I'm just going to, I can't. And then I'm just going to copy and paste this loop right there. So now we have this drum loop that's going to play. We get the idea, but what I'm wanting to get at is that these don't really line up very well. So one thing we can do with these notes, if I click on the thing, okay, so we click on them. I'm just going to control all. No, I'm going to select it, control all, and I'll do it like this. Control all my notes. We're going to quantize them. This essentially, quantizing means just making the MIDI notes line up to the beat. This can be useful or it can be very not good. Depends on what you need, how specific you're being, whether or not you have any room for, wiggle room. But basically, it just takes the MIDI note and lines it up with the closest beat. So if we click it, this opens up this window and we can work with stuff. So we can quantize it to the 16th note or the quarter note or whatever we need. I'm going to say quarter note. Why not? We can have it, so we can swing it. We can set anything up, whatever we want to do. We can adjust a fair bit of stuff. If we hit apply, you notice that now these notes kind of shifted around a bit. Maybe this is what we want. Maybe it's not. I'm going to go with no and change this instead to a 16th note and apply. That looks a little bit more like what we want. So now if I mute the other one, what track am I on? We won't find out. All right, so I mean they didn't line up big beat structure wise, just because of the way this drum pattern was at a different length and different meter than the synthesizer up here. But hopefully you were able to notice that the notes generally started at the same time. This was the kind of big one. It's not exactly, but it's lined up a lot more easily. So it sounds like it syncs a little bit better. I'll play that one more time. So for me, I think quantizing your MIDI notes, it's very useful and you should definitely take advantage of it, but you definitely want to make sure, nudge them just a little bit, maybe, find everything just right, go in and adjust it after that, because it's just, again, an algorithm. It's going to be, hey, here's the closest, 16th note, and I didn't do anything here, but the closest 16th note, and it's just going to jump it right to there and adjust the tempo. Maybe what you want, may not. I recommend, if you record it live, once you've got the other stuff, that'll be pretty close, and then you can kind of quantize it to get things in sync and then go in and nudge things how you want. But it's a very useful tool, and I highly recommend using that whenever working with loops and things like that. So again, just to hear them, I'm gonna just play the just the synthesizers now, and hopefully you'll be able to hear that they don't really line up anymore. All right, it may have been a little hard to tell, but the second one down here, the horns tended to be a little bit behind everything else. So just so you know, I'm just gonna close these out, and that's the main part of MIDI. Again, the main stuff, you can adjust the tempos, so that way it reads the instructions, the MIDI notes faster or slower. All that kind of stuff. Again, it's basically just notes. Sometimes you can do chords. Depends on the synthesizer, but I could. Let me just. Wrong. Too far. There we go. Let me just record there, and then I can. All right. So I got that, but I'm playing multiple notes at once. That time, chords, but because this synthesizer can only play one note at a time, we were only hearing the last note that I played at that one time. So, you can make chords and chord progressions. You just need to have a synthesizer that can do that. So if I went over here and played the same thing. That sounds a lot different than what it sounded like up here, because the Presence synthesizer that this has can do chords, but Mojito can not. So just a little FYI. The last thing I'm gonna go through, again, it's just a very brief overview. Again, we're gonna use MIDI to control the synthesizers. That's how we tell them to play, so you don't have to play it live every time. Is something that'll be very useful for recording your MIDI. I haven't used it so far, but this is, again, something that'd be very useful. So I'm just actually going to scroll back right there, and we're going to record, but I'm going to do a few things right over here with the metronome. So again, like I mentioned, you can adjust the tempo or the timing and keys and all that if you want, but the metronome section is what's useful. So this little triangle icon, it looks like an old school metronome if you've ever used those before. That just turns the metronome off and on. The settings, the wrench here pulls up the setup. Right, and you can set up what the metronome sounds like. So if we're in a 4-beat thing, we can say, change what the sounds are. So maybe instead of that, we'll have I don't know, rim shots, and I don't know, I'm just picking some random ones, tambourine and cowbell. That's probably going to sound pretty bad, but you can customize it however you want. What's kind of important here is the pre-count option, and you can essentially have the metronome count in for you before the computer starts recording. So if you have your drum beats, you want to make sure all your melodies line up and are pretty close without having to really worry about quantizing too much. You should still try doing it, but if you record it really well the first time, you may not. But you can turn on the pre-count. I recommend setting it to 2 bars. But now whenever I start recording, and I hit the record button here, you'll see on the button it will count down for in this case 8 beats, because it's 2 bars of 4 beats each. You'll see it count down, and you will hear it go click, 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 and then it'll start. So we can use that to set things up. So I'm just going to record, and we can see that right just below my mouse. So we saw that there. So now I've got my MIDI notes here that are pretty in sync with the beat. Again, that I had it turned on so it was still clicking while I was recording, so I could help sync that up. Now, if we click this, you'll see that, again, this is pretty close to all the beats right here. Not quite. If I selected all the notes, we can quantize. Go closest 8th note. There we go. So now, again, so you just gotta fine tune how it is. But now you'll see that all of these line up right on these significant beats with the lines. So if I play this, let me just, I forgot to move back. So if I go back here and play this, it's starting to line up. And if I were to actually go in and take this drum loop, I accidentally copied it an extra time. All right, let's just see. We should hear that these line up pretty well. I forgot I muted that. Okay, last time. All right, so we've got that right there. Again, this is just a very basic example of some of the more common things that you'll use MIDI for in this class. Again, you can get much more in-depth and do really a lot with MIDI. And it's again, you can do quite a bit. You know, working with notes, synthesizers, you can actually use it to control automation and things like that. But I'm gonna have a separate video about that, just to make sure everything is up to date. But you can actually use your MIDI controller to control things like the volume and the panning and other parameter effects. It's very useful, but this video has already gone on for 20 minutes. So I just want to make that into a separate one. So if you learned something, again, go ahead and give this video a nice, like, subscribe, all that stuff. YouTube, yay, it does help a lot with making these videos, getting them out there for students. And again, if you have any questions or something didn't work or you just had no idea what I was talking about or why you should really care, go ahead and put that down in the comment. I love answering questions and following up with people like that. But anyways, I'm just kind of rambling at this point, so that's going to be the end of my video, and I will see you all the next time that